Deep in the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains, where the fog never seems to lift and the forest swallows every echo, whispers of a family have survived for generations. A family so brutal, so feared, that their very name was spoken only in hushed voices. Travelers who wandered too far into Kentucky's wilderness were said to vanish without a trace. No bodies, no graves, just silence. But locals told a darker story. They spoke of a clan that did not hunt deer or bear or boar. They hunted men. Their fires burned late into the night, and the smell that drifted through the hollows was not of game, but of something far more sinister. History books never mention them, yet the legend refuses to die. Tonight, we reopen the case of the Cannibals of Kentucky, the most terrifying Appalachian family you never knew existed. The Appalachian Mountains have always carried stories, legends whispered around campfires, passed down from one generation to the next. Some are harmless tales of lost gold mines or ghostly lights in the forest. But others cut deeper, lingering like a chill in the marrow. Among these, few are as unsettling as the rumors that drifted out of Kentucky in the late 1800s. Rumors of a family that thrived not on the land, but on the flesh of those unfortunate enough to cross their path. The hollows of eastern Kentucky were a place apart from the world. Roads were poor, towns sparse, and neighbors often miles away. Poverty and isolation bred a way of life that was hard, unforgiving. Families relied on one another, but they also learned quickly not to trust outsiders. Travelers who passed through these ridges often remarked on the silence, the way the woods seemed to press in close, watching. To the locals, those woods were not empty. Something darker lived there. It began, as many Appalachian stories do, with disappearances. A peddler who set out to sell his wares and never returned. A trapper whose camp was found abandoned, his rifle and tools still lying neatly by the fire, but no sign of the man himself. At first, these vanishings could be explained away. Wild animals, outlaws, the cruel hand of nature. But when the numbers grew, and when hunters swore they smelled meat roasting on the wind yet found no deer hanging in the trees, the whispers began. The whispers spoke of a family hidden deep in the hills. A clan that had long since cut ties with the rest of society. They built no church, tended no crops, and buried no dead. Their cabin, it was said, was always shrouded in smoke. And inside, the smell of burning fat was enough to turn even the strongest stomach. For years, these rumors were dismissed as mountain superstition, a way to frighten children into staying close to home. But the fear was real. Locals avoided certain trails, warning strangers not to linger after sundown. Old women made the sign of the cross when the subject was raised, and men who laughed at the stories often found their voices growing quieter when they walked the woods alone. By the turn of the century, the story of the Kentucky cannibal family had taken root. It was not written in newspapers or carved into history books, but in the spoken word, in the hush that fell over a gathering when the subject arose. And though no one claimed to have seen them directly, everyone seemed to know someone who had. An uncle, a cousin, a friend who stumbled too close and fled with terror in his eyes. The mountains are filled with secrets, and some secrets refuse to die. This is where our story begins. In the mist and silence of Appalachia, where a family lived on the edge of humanity, their legend carried only by those who dared whisper their name. The Appalachian wilderness was not just a backdrop, it was a living thing. The ridges rose like walls, hemming in the valleys, while the hollows cut deep into the earth like scars. For locals, the forest was both provider and predator, giving wood, game, and water, but also hiding dangers that no man could predict. Bears roamed the ridges, wolves howled at night, and yet ask any old-timer, and they would tell you the animals were not what you should fear most. It was the people who lived beyond the last road, tucked deep where even sunlight struggled to break through the canopy. Families who wanted no part of society, who lived and died in the shadow of the trees. Among these, one name always rose to the surface, though it was spoken only in whispers. The clan that ate its own kind. No records placed them neatly in history. No church ledger bore their baptisms, no courthouse carried their marriages, and no cemetery marked their graves. Yet their legend was etched deep into the memory of Appalachia. The locals called them the Hollow Folk, or simply that family, and though details shifted with every telling, one truth remained constant: they were not like other men. At the head of the clan was a man known only as Elias. Tall, broad, with a beard that reached his chest, Elias was said to have eyes that caught the light like an animal's. He had been born of the mountains and had grown hardened by their hunger. Some claimed he was once a trapper who turned to darker means when the game thinned. Others believed he had always been something less than human. Whatever the truth, he was remembered for his cruelty. Elias taught his children that meat was meat, whether it walked on 4 legs or 2. His wife Martha was no less feared. Unlike her husband, Martha was quiet, watchful. Those who claimed to have seen her described a woman with hollow cheeks and a stare that followed you long after you left. Rumor said she was the one who butchered the bodies, salting strips of flesh and hanging them as though they were venison. Some even whispered she would hum old hymns while she worked, her voice carrying out through the cracks of the cabin. Then there were the children, 3 sons and a daughter, though the numbers varied depending on who told the tale. They were raised in shadow, taught to hunt not just with snares and knives but with smiles. They'll invite you in, locals warned. Offer you stew, a place to sit by the fire. By the time you taste the food, it's already too late. Travelers who vanished near their land were always said to have taken the wrong turn, to have followed a path deeper than intended. Once inside their hollow, the woods closed in like jaws. Some claimed the family used lanterns to lure men from the trails at night, the glow bobbing through the dark like will-o'-the-wisps. Others swore they heard laughter echoing from between the trees, high-pitched, childlike, but never quite human. What kept the locals silent was not just fear of death, it was fear of becoming forgotten. When the clan took someone, no trace was left. Bones were burned or buried deep, clothes repurposed, names swallowed by the mountains. "It's one thing to die," an old woman once muttered, "but to vanish like you never were, that's worse." And so the family thrived in secrecy. Generations came and went, but the legend persisted, changing only in small details. Elias and Martha may have died, their children may have taken their place, but the hunger was said to live on. It was not a hunger for survival, it was ritual, an inheritance, a way of life. Even now, long after the last reported disappearance, hikers who pass through that part of Kentucky swear they feel watched. Campers tell of strange knocks in the night, as though something circles just beyond the firelight. And sometimes when the wind shifts, the air carries the faint smell of smoke and meat. The woods remember. The locals never forget. And the family? Some say they are still out there waiting. It was late autumn when the peddler, a man named Thomas Keaton, set out from the nearest town to sell his wares in the hollows of eastern Kentucky. Thomas was a seasoned traveler, a man who had walked the dirt roads of Appalachia for years, carrying bolts of cloth, knives and trinkets to the scattered settlements. He knew the forest could be unforgiving, storms came without warning and animals could turn predator at any moment. But he did not know what waited hidden beyond the last ridge. The locals had warned him. "Keep to the main road," they said, "and don't wander after sundown." But Thomas had grown impatient, eager to reach a small community tucked deeper in the woods. He ignored the old warnings, thinking them superstition. As dusk fell, he found himself in a dense hollow. The trees here arched overhead like a cathedral, their branches interlocking to block the last of the light. He paused, noticing a faint glow up ahead, a lantern swinging gently near a cabin. Relief washed over him. Shelter. Warmth. Perhaps even a hot meal before night fully fell. He did not yet understand the danger. The cabin door opened and a woman's voice called softly, "Come in, traveler. Rest your feet. Have some stew." She was Martha, the matriarch of the family. Her face, framed by shadows, seemed gentle at first. Thomas, exhausted, stepped inside. The cabin smelled of smoke and something rich, savory, but the scent was oddly metallic. Inside, Elias emerged, a broad man with hands the size of hams and eyes that reflected the lantern's fire. He smiled. "You've traveled far," he said. "Sit. Stay the night. We'll see you safely on your way in the morning." Thomas hesitated but could not refuse. Hunger gnawed at him, and the warmth of the cabin was inviting. He sat by the fire as Martha ladled stew into a wooden bowl. Around him, the children moved silently, their eyes curious and too knowing. The first bite was strange. The flavor was rich, almost overwhelming, and something inside Thomas recoiled, but exhaustion dulled his judgment. Conversation was minimal. Elias spoke of hunting, of mountain life, of the difficulty of surviving the cold winters. Thomas nodded, trying to ignore the prickle of fear crawling up his spine. Later that night, when the wind howled outside, Thomas could not sleep. He listened to the crackle of the fire, the occasional scrape of a chair, and then, from somewhere in the back of the cabin, a faint sound, almost like a whimper. He rose, thinking one of the children might be hurt. He followed the sound down a narrow hallway, the floorboards groaning beneath his weight. And then he saw it, a door slightly ajar, revealing a small room where strips of meat hung from hooks, drying. The smell hit him fully, iron, smoke, something unmistakably human. Heart hammering, Thomas stumbled backward, but Elias was already there. The man's smile had vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory gaze. "You've wandered too far," Elias said simply. "And you've seen too much." Martha stepped forward, her expression calm, almost apologetic. "It's nothing personal," she said. "You've been chosen." Thomas never left that cabin. The next morning, locals found his empty horse tied to the post outside, his satchel still full, but the peddler himself was gone. Rumors spread quickly. The hollow folk had claimed another victim. Some said they could still hear his footsteps in the hollow at night, a fading echo that warned all who dared wander too close. From that day on, the story of Thomas Keaton became a warning repeated in hushed tones. Never stray from the path, and never trust a glowing light in the Appalachian dark. His disappearance cemented the family's reputation, turning fear into legend. And deep in the woods, the hollow folk carried on, their hunger undiminished, their secret intact. After Thomas Keaton's disappearance, a shadow fell over the hollows of eastern Kentucky. The locals, already wary of the dense forests and rugged ridges, grew cautious to the point of paranoia. Parents kept children close, farmers avoided the trails at dusk, and travelers, if they ventured into the area at all, moved quickly, eyes scanning the trees for movement. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed they had seen flickering lanterns in the woods, far from any cabin or road. Others swore they had heard laughter, not joyful but high-pitched, echoing through the hollows, disappearing as suddenly as it came. Tales of strange smells, of fires burning in the dead of night, and of shadows moving where no human should be, became common conversation in taverns and church porches. The disappearance of Thomas Keaton compelled a few brave, or foolish, souls to investigate. A small group of hunters, armed with rifles and lanterns, set out to follow the peddler's last known route. They scoured the trails, marking signs and leaving notes for any other travelers. Yet when night fell, even the bravest were seized by unease. The forest seemed alive, whispering warnings with every gust of wind. One hunter, a man named Samuel Crawford, claimed to have glimpsed the cabin from afar. He described the windows as glowing like embers in a black fireplace, yet the smoke curling from the chimney smelled not of wood, but something iron-like, sweet, and pungent. Peering closer, Samuel swore he saw movement inside. A large man, a woman with hollow cheeks, and children whose eyes reflected the lantern's fire unnaturally. Terrified, Samuel fled, leaving his rifle behind. Over the next weeks, more reports surfaced. Cattle were found slaughtered near the edges of the forest, their meat partially consumed. But the strange thing was the precision. Whoever had done it knew exactly how to butcher, as if guided by experience far beyond ordinary human skill. Hounds refused to enter certain hollows, whimpering and refusing to track scents that led too close to the cabin. Even seasoned loggers whispered about missing axes and tools, claiming some unseen hand had moved or hidden them. The fear became contagious. Families barricaded doors and windows earlier each night. Hunters refused to patrol alone. Parents threatened to punish children if they ventured too close to the woods. And yet, the whispers persisted. The hollow folk were patient. They did not need to strike often. One disappearance, one frightening encounter, was enough to sow terror and ensure silence. As the legend grew, so did the cunning of the family. Elias and Martha seemed to anticipate the movements of the locals. Travelers who approached the hollows found trails mysteriously altered, signs leading them in circles, and markers of paths erased overnight. Smoke from the cabin chimneys would appear in multiple locations, confusing even the most seasoned trackers. It was as though the forest itself obeyed the family, hiding their presence and amplifying their myth. By the winter of that year, the hollow folks' reputation had transformed the community. No one ventured near the deeper hollows after sunset. Stories of vanished men, missing horses, and mysterious lights became not just folklore but a guiding rule. Survival meant respecting the forest, and fearing what lived inside it. And the family? They watched. Their children grew, learning the ways of the woods and the secrets of terror. The forest became their ally, the locals' fear their greatest weapon. Every rumor, every hushed warning reinforced the legend. Some historians later dismissed these events as superstition, a mixture of isolation and fear exaggerated over time. But for those who lived there then, the dread was tangible. Even decades later, when outsiders visit the hollows, they speak of unease, the feeling of eyes watching from the shadows, and the lingering scent of smoke that never seems to belong to any ordinary fire. The hollow folk had carved their mark into the Appalachian wilderness, not through numbers or armies but through fear, cunning, and brutality. Their story was no longer just that of a family but a warning. In the mountains of Kentucky, some legends are not mere tales, they are lived nightmares. The hollow folk were not merely a family, they were a force of habit, a living tradition of cruelty meticulously honed over generations. The locals may have whispered about disappearances and strange fires, but they never glimpsed the full truth. The family's actions were deliberate, ritualistic, and frighteningly organized. Every step, every movement within their cabin followed patterns born from secrecy and survival, and perhaps something darker. At the center of it all was Elias, the patriarch. Rising before dawn, he would move silently through the cabin, checking weapons, sharpening knives, and inspecting traps he had laid in the woods. Every tool, every rope, every hook had a purpose. Nothing was left to chance. His children, even the youngest, were trained to assist, learning the careful art of patience, observation, and deception. One wrong step could ruin the family's plans, or worse, alert the locals. Martha, meanwhile, managed the preparations inside. The kitchen, already the heart of terror, was a place of dark efficiency. Large iron pots simmered with stews and broths, rich with flavors meant to entice travelers, but subtly seasoned with ingredients meant to weaken or sedate. Shelves were lined with jars of herbs, some medicinal, some more sinister. Strips of meat, meticulously prepared, hung in rows, their origin unspoken but never questioned by the children. Evenings were the most important time. As darkness swallowed the ridges, the family would perform small, silent rituals. Candles flickered around the cabin, forming shapes that outsiders could not decipher. The children learned to move like shadows, to whisper like the wind, and to watch for the faintest flicker of light or sound. Elias would speak quietly to them about the importance of discretion. "The forest hides us," he would say, "but our prey must never see our truth. Fear is the blood of survival." When travelers were near, the family's precision became chilling. Lanterns would sway gently, carefully positioned to lure the unsuspecting deeper into the woods. Smells of fresh stew or baking bread carried along trails, drawing men off safe paths. Every invitation extended by Martha seemed genuine, a simple gesture of hospitality, but it masked a deadly trap. The children learned early that compliance was survival. The eldest son, Samuel, was taught to mimic innocence, offering a friendly smile and a handshake that concealed the strength and training of his youth. The daughters observed quietly, hiding behind doorways or moving silently through the cabin, their eyes always alert. No one entered the hollow folks' home unobserved, and nothing escaped their notice. Even the forest itself became part of the ritual. Elias set snares and alarms along likely routes, not to kill, but to delay or mislead anyone who wandered too close. Fires were lit in multiple locations, smoke curling in misleading patterns to confuse any trackers. The family had learned that terror worked as effectively as violence. If men believed they were being watched, if they feared the unseen, they would often turn back before ever discovering the true danger. Martha's most secret ritual involved the preparation of the meals that outsiders might taste. She approached it with precision and calm, humming softly as she worked. Every cut, every seasoning, every placement of a dish was intentional. The children watched, learning, understanding that their family's survival, and the continuation of their terrifying legacy, depended on skill, patience, and the ability to manipulate fear and desire alike. By the time night fell completely, the cabin was a nexus of anticipation. The family would sit quietly, observing the forest, listening for distant footsteps, watching for the flicker of lantern light on a path. And when a traveler, weary from the mountains, approached the cabin, it was as if the forest itself had guided them there. This meticulous preparation, this combination of fear, ritual, and cunning, ensured that the hollow folk remained a mystery, a legend, and a nightmare. The locals spoke of the family's presence only in whispers, afraid of drawing attention, aware that a single misstep might be their last. And so the cycle continued. Each disappearance, each successful lure, reinforced the family's control over the forest and the hollows, teaching the children the lessons that had been passed down for generations. The forest is yours, fear is your ally, and survival comes to those who embrace darkness without hesitation. The Hollow folk were no ordinary family. They were hunters of men, masters of shadows, and inheritors of a terror that would not easily be forgotten. And with each night that fell over the ridges of Kentucky, their rituals continued, unseen yet palpably present, feeding both their hunger and the growing legend of the Cannibals of the Hollow. It was a night when the Appalachian fog clung to the ridges like a living shroud. The air was thick, cold, and smelled faintly of wet leaves and smoke. Jonathan Marks, a traveling carpenter from the neighboring county, had been warned to avoid the Hollow's. Locals muttered about missing men, about the Hollow folk who dwelled deep in the woods. But Jonathan was confident, or perhaps foolishly brave. He needed work and had no choice but to follow the unmarked trail leading deeper into the mountains. As he walked, the forest seemed to close in around him. Branches scraped against his shoulders, and unseen eyes seemed to flicker in the shadows. Each crunch of leaves underfoot echoed too loudly. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the faint creak of a swinging lantern. Relief washed over him, light and perhaps shelter, but there was something off. The glow was too steady, too inviting, like a beacon placed intentionally to lure him forward. Minutes later he reached the cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney in spirals, twisting unnaturally against the fog. Jonathan hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But hunger and exhaustion drove him to knock. The door creaked open before he could, revealing a woman with hollow cheeks, her eyes unnervingly calm. Martha smiled. "Come in, traveler. Warm yourself by the fire. Rest your weary hands." The warmth of the cabin was deceptive. The smell was intoxicating yet off-putting, a blend of herbs and something metallic beneath it. Shadows danced along the walls, cast by the flickering firelight and lanterns, but they seemed to move with a life of their own. As Jonathan stepped in, the door slammed shut behind him, muffling the foggy silence outside. Inside, the children watched from corners, their eyes too sharp, their expressions eerily still. Elias emerged from the shadows, massive and silent, his gaze cold and calculating. He said nothing. The silence itself pressed against Jonathan like a weight, until Martha's calm voice broke it, guiding him to a seat and ladling a stew thick and savory, but with a bitterness Jonathan could not place. He tried to eat, tried to convince himself it was just a meal, but his stomach churned. A faint whimper echoed from a doorway at the back. His eyes followed, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Hooks hanging from the ceiling, strips of meat swaying slightly as if breathing. The smell hit him fully, iron, smoke, and something unnamably human. Panic surged, and Jonathan realized he had to escape. Every instinct screamed at him, but the cabin was a maze. Doors led to walls, hallways twisted back upon themselves, and shadows seemed to whisper, closing in with every step. The firelight flickered as if mocking him, revealing glimpses of the family moving silently, their steps impossibly quiet. He tried the front door, it was locked. Windows were nailed shut, but even as he searched, Martha's soft humming followed him, chilling and hypnotic. He stumbled over a rug and fell, catching a glimpse of the children peering over the doorway. Their eyes were too knowing, almost predatory, yet innocent. They were part of the ritual, taught to watch, to wait, to instill terror before the final act. Jonathan's mind raced. He remembered the warnings, the lanterns, the laughter, the disappearances, but now, standing in the cabin, he understood the depth of the danger. The Hollow folk were not hunting blindly, they were masters of fear, crafting every moment to strip his courage away. The shadows were theirs, the fire theirs, even the air seemed to pulse with menace. In desperation, he seized a knife from the table and backed toward a side window. The lock gave way and he plunged into the foggy night, rolling into the underbrush. Behind him, muffled footsteps and a low rhythmic hum echoed from the cabin, following him, mocking his flight. The forest, usually a sanctuary, became a labyrinth. Every tree seemed to twist, roots snagged his feet, and the fog hid the path. Jonathan ran blindly for what felt like hours. He dared not look back, fearing glimpses of eyes that were not human. He tripped, scratched, and fell, finally collapsing in a hollow far from the cabin, panting, bloodied, but alive. The forest was silent now, except for the faint, lingering scent of smoke. It was as if the cabin itself exhaled, claiming its victory not through capture but through terror. When he finally reached the town at dawn, Jonathan's story was met with hushed disbelief. His clothes torn, his hands raw, he could barely speak of the horrors he had witnessed. Yet in every glance, every word, the locals saw the truth. The hollow folk were real, patient, and relentless. The legend was no longer just whispers, it was a haunting reality. And somewhere deep in the Appalachian mountains, Elias, Martha, and their children waited, teaching the next generation the lessons of shadows, fear, and survival. For them, Jonathan's escape was merely a delay. The mountains held their secrets, and the hollow folk were patient enough to wait for the next traveler to wander too far. By the time winter had begun to tighten its grip on the Appalachian ridges, fear had become a constant companion for the locals. Tales of disappearances, haunted lanterns, and ghostly laughter no longer elicited mere whispers. They demanded action. A small group of men, armed with rifles, lanterns, and courage tempered by desperation, decided it was time to confront the hollow folk. Among them were Samuel Crawford, who had glimpsed the cabin months earlier, and David Harlan, a blacksmith whose brother had vanished near the trails. They moved cautiously through the fog-choked forest, each step deliberate, each whisper weighed. The hollows seemed alive, shadows bending and twisting with every gust of wind. Even the most seasoned trackers felt the oppressive stillness pressing against their minds, as though the mountains themselves were conspiring to keep the hollow folk hidden. Hours passed before they spotted the cabin, nestled in a hollow where the trees crowded unnaturally close. Smoke curled from the chimney, sweet and metallic, carrying the unmistakable scent of cooked meat. The men froze, every instinct screaming that this place was not meant for the living. Inside, Elias and Martha waited. The family had known they were coming. Children perched silently at windows, their eyes glinting with unnatural awareness. The cabin seemed to breathe with anticipation, the flickering lanterns casting shadows that moved independently, as if mocking the intruders. Samuel took the lead, stepping onto the porch. He called out, his voice firm but strained, "Elias, Martha, we know what you've done. Come out and face us." For a heartbeat there was silence. Then the front door creaked open, revealing Martha's hollow face, calm and unreadable. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly. Her voice carried an authority that seemed to still the very air. Suddenly the children appeared at the edges, flitting between shadows, their presence disorienting. Elias stepped forward, massive and silent, his eyes locked on the men. The tension was palpable. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The men fired a warning shot into the air. The sound cracked through the hollow like a whip, yet no animal stirred, no birds fled. It was as if the forest had paused in respect, or fear. Elias didn't flinch. The family had mastered patience, and they had prepared for this moment. Then the real horror began. Lanterns placed around the clearing flickered violently, casting long, twisting shadows. From the cabin, a low, rhythmic hum emerged, rising and falling in time with the pounding of the men's hearts. It was both hypnotic and menacing, the sound of generations training their prey without touching them. David tried to move forward, but roots and uneven terrain seemed to conspire against him. Samuel shouted again, demanding the family surrender, but the shadows in the trees shifted unnaturally, forming shapes too precise, too deliberate to be mere branches. Whispers carried through the fog, distant but distinct. A child's laughter, a man's groan, a sound that seemed both inside and outside their minds. The men realized they were trapped not by walls or chains, but by the forest itself, manipulated by the hollow folk. Panic began to set in. One man stumbled and a child darted from the shadows, its small hand brushing his leg. He screamed, but when he turned, the child was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of smoke and iron. Elias's calm, predatory presence contrasted sharply with the chaos he orchestrated. "You should not have come," he repeated, his voice carrying a quiet finality. The men understood in that moment that they were dealing with more than just a brutal family. They were confronting a force that had perfected fear itself. Desperation drove the men to flee. They ran blindly through the fog, tripping over roots, crashing through underbrush, pursued by the subtle sounds of movement behind them. When they reached the nearest road at dawn, their faces were pale, their bodies exhausted. One by one they recounted the encounter, each version more disjointed than the last. Shadows had moved independently. Lanterns had flickered in impossible ways. Whispers had followed them long after the cabin was out of sight. The town's elders listened with grim understanding. The hollow folk had survived not because they were stronger, but because they had mastered the art of terror. Each confrontation, each escape only added to the legend. The mountains had swallowed the truth again, leaving only fear in its wake. From that day forward, no man dared approach the hollow alone. Lanterns, smoke, and whispers became more than warnings. They became deterrents. The family's presence felt even when unseen. The Appalachian wilderness held its secret tightly, teaching the locals a lesson they would never forget. Some horrors cannot be fought, only feared. And deep in the cabin, Elias, Martha, and the children watched, their patience eternal, their mastery of fear unchallenged, waiting for the next traveler foolish enough to wander into their haunted domain. By the following autumn, fear had hardened into resolve among the local community. The disappearances, whispers, and haunting tales could no longer be ignored. Families who had lost loved ones banded together, forming a small militia of determined men. They carried rifles, torches, and the bitter knowledge that they were about to enter a territory where the forest itself seemed alive. Among them were Samuel Crawford, still haunted by his previous encounter, and David Harlan, whose brother's fate at the hands of the hollow folk remained unresolved. The plan was simple yet dangerous. Track the family to their cabin, catch them off guard, and end the reign of terror once and for all. Armed with knowledge gleaned from rumors, locals set out just before dusk, moving silently through the mist-choked hollows. Every crunch of leaves and snap of a twig seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. Hours into the pursuit, they finally saw the cabin. Lanterns glowed faintly through the fog, smoke curling in delicate spirals above the chimney. The forest around it seemed unnatural, as if the trees themselves leaned inward, guarding the secret within. The locals paused, weighing courage against caution. Some whispered prayers, others gripped rifles tighter. Inside, Elias and Martha were already aware of the intruders. The family had long learned to anticipate movements, using the labyrinthine paths of the forest and subtle signals to track those who sought them. Children flitted silently among corners and windows, their eyes glinting with unnatural awareness. Shadows seemed to twist, elongate, and shift, creating illusions that disoriented the hunters. The first shots rang out, warning shots meant to intimidate rather than kill. Elias appeared, massive and silent, and the air seemed to tighten around the intruders. "You should not have come," he intoned, his voice low and deliberate. Martha emerged calmly, hands clasped, her hollow gaze meeting each man's with unflinching intent. Chaos erupted. The forest seemed to conspire with the family, roots snagging boots, fog concealing movements, and shadows misleading the militia. Men stumbled, fell, and shouted in panic, while distant laughter echoed, high-pitched, mocking, and entirely human yet disturbingly alien. The children darted between trees and windows, guiding and manipulating the intruders with frightening precision. David Harlan fired at Elias, but the shot missed, thudding harmlessly into the trunk of a tree. Samuel Crawford attempted to flank Martha, only to find himself caught in a tangle of branches that seemed to rise from the ground unnaturally. Every attempt to advance was countered not with brute force, but with cunning, patience, and fear. It became clear, the hollow folk were masters of psychological terror. The men were not merely battling a family, they were trapped in an environment engineered to disorient and terrorize. Lanterns flickered in impossible patterns, whispers came from directions that made no sense, and the ever-present scent of smoke and iron hung heavily in the air. Exhausted, terrified, and disoriented, the militia retreated. They stumbled back through the forest, losing cohesion, and some nearly fell into ravines hidden by the fog. No one dared look back, but faint laughter, shadows slipping through the trees, and glimpses of glowing eyes followed them until they finally reached the main road at dawn. The town elders listened as the survivors recounted the night. Their stories were fragmented, terrifying, and consistent in one chilling truth: the hollow folk had survived once again. No body, no cabin damage, no sign of the family, only lingering fear. The mountains had swallowed them once more, leaving behind legends, whispers, and the undeniable impression of a presence that could never be eradicated. By the next month, the hollows returned to their deceptive calm. Travelers avoided the area, lanterns were used sparingly, and parents warned children never to stray from familiar paths. The hollow folk had proven that force alone could not overcome them. They thrived in the shadows, masters of patience, observation, and cruelty. And so, the stage was set for the final chapter. The family remained, hidden yet omnipresent, their legacy sealed in fear, their domain unchallenged, and their methods perfected over generations. For the mountains had not only nurtured them, they had become part of them. The Appalachian hollows, once a landscape of quiet isolation, had transformed into a theater of terror, ensuring that the Hollow Folks legend would endure. Decades had passed since the first disappearance in the Kentucky Hollows. Yet the legend of the Hollow Folk remained as vivid and chilling as ever. Travelers, hunters, and locals alike whispered of the family that manipulated shadows, twisted forests, and preyed upon the unwary. Some dismissed the stories as superstition. Others, who had glimpsed lanterns flickering in impossible patterns or heard laughter echoing from the fog, knew better. The Hollow Folk were not a myth, they were an enduring terror. Even as the modern world crept closer to the Appalachian ridges, the family persisted. The cabin, hidden deep within the hollows, was unchanged by time. Smoke still curled from the chimney, though no lawman or traveler had approached it for decades. The rituals continued, subtle but unbroken, passed down from Elias and Martha to their children, and now to grandchildren. Each generation learned patience, observation, and the careful orchestration of fear. The forest itself seemed to bend in obedience, a partner in the perpetuation of horror. Historians and folklorists occasionally attempted to document the Hollow Folk, compiling records of disappearances, testimonies, and eerie accounts. Yet every investigation met the same obstacle: no concrete evidence. Cattle mutilations, vanished merchants, missing hunters, all traced, yet never proven to be the work of the family. The forest erased mistakes, twisted perceptions, and fed the legend. Fear became their shield, ensuring the secret remained intact. One story, often recounted among locals, stood out as a testament to the family's enduring mastery. A hiker in the late 20th century, unfamiliar with the hollows, ventured too far along a ridge. Mist hung low and distant lanterns flickered between trees. Drawn by curiosity and the hope of shelter, he approached the cabin. From the forest came whispers, guiding him toward the light. Shadows moved unnaturally, playing tricks on his eyes. By the time he realized the danger, the hiker had turned back, heart pounding, but the cabin remained, silent, patient, and waiting. This encounter, like countless others before it, reinforced the central truth: the Hollow Folks' power lay not in brute force, but in psychological mastery. They had learned to manipulate fear itself, turning the environment into a weapon, orchestrating shadows, sounds, and scents to control those who dared enter their domain. It was an art perfected over generations, and its effectiveness had ensured the family's survival. In the Appalachian Hollows, legends of the family became warnings embedded into local culture. Parents would whisper to children about wandering too far, travelers were advised to avoid certain trails, and the mountains themselves seemed to exhale a cautionary breath. Fear was their inheritance, and the forest their accomplice. Yet, the most terrifying aspect of the Hollow Folks' legacy was subtle. They were patient. Every disappearance, every vanished traveler, every whispered tale reinforced their dominion, teaching the next generation to respect, or fear, the shadows. Time passed, seasons changed, and technology advanced, but the mountains remained wild, dark, and inscrutable. The Hollow Folk adapted, their rituals evolving alongside the world outside, yet never losing the precision that had made them a living nightmare. Even in contemporary times, hikers report faint sounds in the fog, glimpses of figures moving just beyond sight, and lanterns appearing where no cabin exists. Locals speak of the lingering scent of smoke and iron, a ghostly reminder that the Hollow Folk are ever present, waiting for the next traveler to wander too far. No official report can confirm it, no photograph can capture it. And perhaps that is their greatest strength, the horror that cannot be proven, only felt. The mountains remember. The hollows remember. And the Hollow Folk endure, patient, cunning, and eternal. Their legacy is etched not on paper, but in the very shadows of the forest, in the whispered warnings of those who survived, and in the chilling certainty that some legends are not simply stories, they are living nightmares. So, as you venture into the Appalachian wilderness, remember the tales. Listen to the wind through the trees, heed the warnings of locals, and respect the shadows that stretch beyond the path. For somewhere, in the depths of Kentucky's hollows, Elias, Martha, and their descendants wait, continuing their rituals, shaping fear, and ensuring that the hollow folk remain a haunting presence for generations yet to come. The hollow folk's terror is not a story of the past. It is a warning, ever present, waiting for the next soul to step too far into the darkness. And in the Appalachian hollows, darkness is patient.